Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing my best climbing team for the Evolution Cup. Now, the rules for the Evolution Cup are very simple. A Pokemon has to have evolved once, and still be able to evolve again. So it's basically a meta where there's a ton of middle stage evolutions running around. My MVP day one of the Evolution Cup was Lairon. Now, I know what you're thinking, how can a Lairon ever be good in Pokemon Go PvP? Well, its moveset is actually surprisingly decent. It is Metal Sound, Rock Tomb, and Body Slam, and I used Lairon to core break a lot of teams that were heavily reliant on Pokemon like Morgrem, Charjabug, and Dusclops. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we get the dream lead in the first match, leading Lairon into Morgrem. My opponent safe switches into Charjabug, and Lairon is already off to a tremendous start core breaking teams. My opponent is actually on Discharge on Charjabug, which did surprise me a little bit. I myself am running Charjabug, but I am running an X's or Crunch moveset. There is a massive amount of Dusclops in this meta, so I do feel that Discharge honestly doesn't really do a lot for you, whereas Crunch can allow you to have a significantly stronger matchup against Dusclops. I'm able to get the catch and sneak of the Discharge, get the full farm down, and now as Morgrem re-hits the field, my opponent is behind by a ton of energy. They can no-shield one X-Scissor, but the second X-Scissor plus the Volt Switch should just about take the knockout here. So unless they want to give up the Morgrem, they're going to have to start shielding. The shield does come up. I know that I do have a decent amount of energy still on the Lairon as well. I'm a little bit worried that a foul play might secure the knockout, so I decide not to risk it, and I use the shield last second. Now I can threaten the final Protect shield or just remove Morgrem from the field of play. X-Scissor is going to be shielded, but my opponent is not going to be able to farm down. They're going to need to fire off energy, and when they do, this is just going to set up Lairon to be able to Rock Tomb whatever's in the back. I bring in Lairon in the back, my opponent has Dusclops, I bank a Rock Tomb, and then switch my Dusclops into theirs. Even though normally you never want to be down energy in a mirror match, I'm basically just using my Dusclops as a meat shield. I'm able to win charge stack parity, which surprises me quite a bit as I do have an extremely good Dusclops, but I should be able to hang on to the Shadow Punch, make Shadow Punch number 2, and I still have all the stored energy on the Lairon. So I'm barely able to hang on, my opponent trying for the farm down, but they're just not going to get it. Shadow Punch will connect, that's going to get them very low. In comes Morgrem, they get farmed down by the Metal Sounds, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We move to game number 2, picking up a very tricky lead, leading Lairon into Hakamo-o. Now, Hakamo-o does have access to Brick Break, and Brick Break will hit for double super effective damage. The good news is I can hit for a little bit of chip damage with Body Slam, and then I go for the Brick Break catch and sneak onto the Dusclops. Normally I don't like save switching Dusclops, but my opponent actually reads the save switch, and they went for the Rock Tomb. Brilliant play, but my opponent, they rebank energy, they bring out Chansey, and I am in absolute shambles. The only thing I have going for me right now is the fact that my opponent has severely misaligned the switch timers. I need to do whatever it takes to try and burn the clock. So I fire off a double resisted and debuff Shadow Punch at the Chansey. If my moves are going to do no damage anyway, then I may as well throw the lower energy move so that way I can get out of the matchup faster. The desync and switch timer forces them to go for the Dazzling Gleam. In comes Hakamo-o. They did rebank a ton of energy, and I'm going to put up the shield. Brick Break will lower my defense and get my first shield, but with all this energy I have on the Lairon, now my opponent can't really afford to shield. So they end up no shielding, but I'm able to get the full farm down, and Hakamo-o will be KO'd. In the back, my opponent has Dusclops, and let's apply a debuff of our own as we fire off the Rock Tomb. Unfortunately, I can't quite make it to Rock Tomb number 2, so I go for the catch and sneak as I switch into the Charjabug. Charjabug more than happy to absorb a debuff Shadow Punch. Back out comes the Chansey, but at this point, I feel like I'm very far ahead in the game. My opponent getting Chansey on Dusclops could have been game ending, but the fact that the switch timer was so heavily desynced allowed me to get a massive energy head start on Lairon. And that's what I really like about Lairon, its energy goes everywhere in this meta. Now I can just spam out X-Scissors, frantically trying to burn the switch timer, and I'm always going to be no shielding here. They can fire off a Dazzling Gleam, but I can get Lairon back on the field once again. My opponent brings back in the Dusclops. I'm already debuffing them as I have so much energy on this Lairon. And even though my opponent was trying to be the one to just kind of outbulk and outlast, it's actually Lairon that is flipping the script. Lairon, at this point, just simply cannot be beat. I'm going to get the final shield or the knockout here at the Rock Tomb, and if my opponent does end up putting up the shield, well, I still have a ton of stored energy on my Clops. So the game-winning play will be to throw 2 Metal Sounds and snipe with the Shadow Punch. We bank the Body Slam, snipe with the Shadow Punch, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We move to game number 3, leading Lairon into Charjabug. This is a very nice matchup. Even though Charjabug is able to outpace, I usually will just no-shield the Discharge or Crunch, but this time my opponent overfarms. This tells me they're not looking to stay in the matchup. They're clearly going to bank energy and reset the debuff. And there it is, in comes the Blade, but I have a very strong answer to the Blade as I can bring in Charge-a-Bug. Charge-a-Bug is a complete wall to energy from the Blade. Gyro Ball, Sacred Sword, both going to be resisted. Now I can overfarm massively, go for the crunch, but my opponent is going to be winning charge attack priority. The good news for me, this is just the Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword going to be doing basically no damage, and if my opponent wants to keep the Blade around, they're going to have to double shield. They decide against it, the Blade gets KO'd. Another matchup where having crunch is very helpful. In comes Hakamo-O. I'm only going to get to one move, so I may as well fish for the debuff. I fire off the crunch, that does almost nothing. We do get the debuff, back in comes the Charge-a-Bug, and I send in Lairon. Lairon will probably get knocked out here by 2 moves. My opponent goes for the crunch, and the second crunch will be enough to secure the knockout. That's still pretty okay for me. I'm okay with letting the Lairon get knocked out because this should set up a pretty massive farm down for Dusclops. Dusclops is going to have to put up the shield, but I exit with such a tremendous energy head start, and that's going to make life really uncomfortable for that Hakamo-O. Hakamo-O will hit the field. They did already bank 3 Dragon Tails before switching out earlier on, and now I can fire off the Ice Punch. Ice Punch will get the shield. I overfarm 3, go for the catch onto the Charge-a-Bug, and that's just going to instantly end the game. I'm pretty confident Dusclops could have taken home the win without getting the catch, but the catch, yeah, that's more or less just going to be the dagger. We move to the next match, Lairon now leading into Piloswine, a very good lead. My opponent safe switches into Dusclops, and I'll be honest, this is a team that doesn't have a strong answer to a Dusclops safe switch. I stayed with the Lairon, more than happy to take a Shadow Punch, and then I can pivot out and bring in Charge-a-Bug. I haven't really played this meta too much outside of the few games that I played today, so I'm not quite sure on damage ranges in terms of whether I can knock out with a crunch. So I'm just going to try and get as many Volt Switches as possible before I eventually fire off this energy. My opponent's going to fire off back-to-back Shadow Punches, getting some pretty nice damage, and they pivot out, sending in Piloswine. But luckily, I was able to see the switch and react in time and fire off the X-Scissor. I'm going to throw back-to-back X-Scissors. This should get me back to my timer, but I'm a little bit worried that I can't go for a Metal Sound down. Metal Sound is not really known for its damage. I really didn't want them to make it to a high horsepower, so I'm just going to guarantee the knockout, fire off the Body Slam, and at the very least, Piloswine has been KO'd. My opponent is going to bring back in the Dusclops. They're not at a range where Rock Tomb would take the knockout just yet, but I decide if I'm going to be shielding, I may as well shield the first, and then I can really start to make life awkward with Rock Tombs. So I fire off Rock Tomb number 1 at the Dusclops. This is getting closer to Rock Tomb range. My opponent will put up the shield, but I'm already at Rock Tomb number 2. The pacing on Lairon is actually quite nice. Rock Tomb connects, taking the knockout in the back. What a cool pick. It's going to be a Haunter. If this Haunter is on Shadow Punch Shadow Ball, I think even though I get a Rock Tomb debuff, there's probably a very real chance that I end up losing this game. Because Haunter has such an absurd attack stat that a -1 Shadow Ball probably still OHKOs the Dusclops. So I switch in the Dusclops, and I just have to hope. If this is a Shadow Ball, GG's well played. I have lost this game. I'm getting one shot, but it's a Shadow Punch. I'm saved. Thankfully, not the Shadow Ball. The camera pans from me to them to me, which tells me they have conceded the match. We pick up a terrible lead in the next match, as I end up leading Lairon into Primeape. I safe switch into the Charge-a-Bug, my opponent responds with Crocolore, and we are off to a very rough start in this game. Charge-a-Bug landing the crunch is very helpful for me. Unfortunately, I'm not quite able to make crunch number 2. Very nice overfarm by my opponent. Crunch is going to be securing the knockout, and I'm going to have to try and go for a very aggressive farm down with the Lairon. Unfortunately, this is an area where Lairon struggles trying to farm down fire types. I only take neutral from fire, but obviously my metal sounds are resisted. I don't really want to take any extra damage, so I'm forced to fire off a Body Slam, but this still does not feel like a particularly strong position to be in. Back in comes the Primeape, I send in Dusclops, it's Chansey in the back. GG's to my opponent, there's just no way out. We move to the next game, Primeape once again, and I safe switch in a Charge-a-Bug. My opponent responds with Crocolore. Apparently, this is a duo Primeape plus Crocolore. The good news for me is I have a ton of stored energy now on this Charge-a-Bug. I fire off the Crunch. Crunch is going to land onto the Crocolore, and my opponent throws on alignment. They did not want to go down a shield, but in doing so, they've now given me an entire free Volt Switch. With that Volt Switch, there's a very real chance that I might be able to farm down and try and flip this. X-Scissor will get the shield, Volt Switch, able to take the KO. We flip switch advantage against the Crocolore, and that hopefully will be game winning. If it's the Chansey in the back again, then the Chansey can't really do anything into the Lairon. My opponent, they know the moveset by now, they absorb the resisted X-Scissor, and they just get the farm down with Primeape. I bring in Dusclops, I have to trust the fact that Dusclops will be able to survive 2 Rage Fists. I'm very leery of my opponent potentially trying to get a catch, because if they're able to catch out of the Chansey, then my Dusclops is very, very low, so I end up going on alignment. Kind of a crazy play, but I feel like at 3100 elo, people would never assume you to throw on alignment. I overfarm, watching for the catch, and once again, it does not come through. So I just keep seeing ghosts here, basically, trying to see catches where they will not happen. I finally throw an alignment, and they do predict the alignment throw as they send in Charjabug. Charjabug able to snipe down with the Volt Switch, but getting that little bit of chip damage with the Ice Punch does mean that they're now firmly inside of Rock Tomb range. So, as the Lairon, I just need to farm up to 2. The Body Slam plus the Rock Tomb. My opponent will be able to get another move, but this charge will not take the knockout. So even though Lairon is very low, I farm up to what I think is a Body Slam plus Rock Tomb. If it's not, I lose the game. Rock Tomb takes the knockout. We do have the Body Slam loaded, and even despite leading Lairon into Primeape, we're gonna survive. Body Slam KOs the Primeape, and we're able to get our revenge. We move to the next game, Lairon into, oh my goodness, look at that, a Braixen. That is a very cool pick. Now, Braixen, I believe, is Ember, Flame Charge, and Psyshock. So, Ember to Flame Charge should be 665. Flame Charge will ramp up their attack, but I can immediately put their attack back to normal as I fire off the Rock Tomb. This matchup, even despite the fact that I have no fast move pressure, actually is pretty nice for the Lairon, because my opponent's never really ever going to be able to Ember me down. So unless my opponent gets a catch out, or unless I decide to take a shield advantage, I should always just be able to win alignment. I decide to fire off Rock Tomb number 2 after overfarming by a bit, breaks in no shields, and we're able to take the KO. In comes Morgrim, but not gonna get the farm down. Lairon hangs on, making it to the Rock Tomb, and getting awesome damage out of the Morgrim as well. Now I can just bring in the Charjabug, go for the full farm down. My opponent fires off the Play Rough, and I think, wait a minute. If it's Chansey in the back, I need to shield. So I shield the -1 Play Rough in the back. That is a Togetic. Definitely not the Chansey that I was worried about. I could have just no-shielded it and won the game with the Dusclops, but either way, we should still be able to get the win. My opponent is on Psyshock on the Togetic. I wonder what their nuke move is if they're on Psyshock. Maybe Psyshock Gleam? I'm a bit surprised they wouldn't be firing off Gleam then. I guess they could be running Ancient Power if they're a little bit worried about a Charjabug maybe. Togetic has an insane amount of potential moves. We're able to land the Ice Punch. Now we can fire off Ice Punch number 2. This will guarantee the final shield, and then I can just switch into the Charjabug. My opponent tries for the catch. They do not get it. There's a bunch of weird white sparkles as they fail the catch, so I guess that's something they got to work on the new system. But one thing I will say, overall, I felt like the gameplay on the new system was really, really good today. I really didn't play a lot of new system the past week because the queue times were really rough in everything that wasn't Competitors Cup as I climbed up to number 6 in the world. But playing on the new system today, I experienced almost no issues. Overall, I would actually say it played a lot better than what I'm used to seeing on the old system. So at least from my experience, granted, it was a 5-set sample size, but I was very happy with how it played. We're able to get kind of a nasty catch in the next match. My opponent went for the Flash Cannon, aiming for the Lairon. We catch it onto the Charjabug, and they pivot out, sending in Morgrim. Morgrim actually goes for the undercharge there. I believe Foul Play would have secured the knockout, but the undercharge, because clearly they want to try and get farm. And they're going to send in Doublade. Doublade is going to get a small energy head start, and now I can just bring in the Dusclops. Dusclops will have a pretty big pacing advantage in this matchup, even being down a little bit of energy. The straight 3 pacing is just absolutely undeniable. Tough call to make here. I decided to no-shield, calling a Sacred Sword bait. My opponent does full send the Gyro Ball. They pivot, sending in the Tinkaton, but now I can bring in the Lairon, and this is going to be a war of attrition. Lairon's charge stacks are completely walled, but the metal sounds are slowly adding up, so I can just debuff them, make life as uncomfortable as possible for the Tinkaton, and slowly whittle them into range where Rock Tomb will take the knockout. At this point, my opponent realizes there's just no way to win, and they will concede the match. We move to the final match, and we have an absolute Spice Lord on the screen in the next match as I lead Lairon into a Shadow Ursaring. I was very scared the Ursaring would be on counter, but thankfully it is just on Shadow Claw. I'm going to farm up, try for the catch. I don't get the catch, but my opponent answers the Charjabug save switch with the Blade. The Blade, we've seen, kind of gets destroyed by Charjabug, so this is a very favorable turn of events for me. Oh my goodness, the crunch lands as well. We can just no-shield the Gyro Ball. The Volt Switch will KO. And I've exited this matchup with a ton of HP remaining on this Charjabug. My new problem is that the Shadow Ursaring is doubled up on Swifts, and I don't win the CMP tie. So I'm just going to have to double shield if I want to hold on to this energy. The good news for me is that the Volt Switch will go through and KO the Ursaring, but my opponent's gonna have 2 shields for whatever's in the back. It turns out that final Pokemon is going to be Dusclops. I can fire off the Crunch to get the shield, and then switch back into Lairon and begin spamming out Rock Tombs. We're able to get the Crunch debuff as well. That's very helpful for me. My opponent can fire off the Shadow Punch. Oh, they go for the Ice Punch there. Definitely not the right move to click. I don't know if that's my opponent conceding the match and basically just looking to have some fun, because they knew that once the Rock Tomb debuffs were applied, there was just simply no path forward in this game. For a minute there, I wondered maybe if they're Ice Punch Poltergeist, but they did actually have the Shadow Punch. But either way, having a Crunch banked on the Charjabug and a double debuff applied with the Rock Tomb, unfortunately, there's just no way out. Shadow Ursaring, definitely the coolest Pokemon that I saw in this meta on day number 1. Leading into it with Lairon, honestly, I was absolutely terrified. I was very, very worried it was going to have counter and then just obliterate me with quad effective counters. Luckily, it was not on counter, and as it turns out, my opponent was pretty soft to Charjabug as a whole. So Charjabug, thankfully, was able to escape me from that predicament, but on the lead, I was very, very worried that I was actually about to end up in a YouTube video myself, getting submitted to somewhere, just getting cooked by the Ursaring. And now some final thoughts on the Evolution Cup as a whole and with the team that I ran today. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid team. However, I don't think I would actually recommend people to build Mons for this team if they don't have them built already. And that's because a Pokemon like Lairon is very unlikely to be good in other metas. While it's very, very strong in this meta, if you don't already have a Lairon built, and believe it or not, I did actually have a Lairon built. Why did I have a Lairon built? I have no idea. I have no recollection as to when I would have previously used a Lairon in the Go Battle League, but I had a Lairon built. So the Lairon ended up working very well, but this is actually a team where I don't recommend that others go out and rush to build these Pokemon, because these are Pokemon that usually don't have a lot of play elsewhere. Like Charjabug is at the very least like an interesting core breaker for the Open Grade League, but like a Dusclops really doesn't do a lot in the Open Grade League right now, and Lairon has never done anything in any meta in its entire life prior to this one. Again, begging the question, why the heck did Henry have a Lairon built? I'm gonna go back through my catalog to see if maybe I built it for like a Spice Showdown or something like that, but I have not the foggiest idea why I have a Lairon. So even though I do think this team is a very, very strong team in this meta, I wouldn't recommend people go out and rush to spend a bunch of resources to test it out. We do have the Master League and the Competitors Cup available right now. I know the Competitors Cup, the game state in it is pretty atrocious, so it's not necessarily an appealing option to play Open Great League when there's a large worry of like your game fully freezing out and one turn bring in and all the issues you have to deal with on the old code. But for those who do already have the Mons built, I think the Evolution Cup, I'd maybe give it a C. I think it is an okay meta. I think Lairon is a very interesting core breaker, as there's a lot of teams that heavily rely on Pokemon like Charjabug, like Morgrem, a lot of the flyers like Togetic, and Lairon is an incredibly strong core breaker into a lot of those teams. Now, what Lairon really does not want to see is Lairon can't do anything into Primate. So when it came to trying to theory craft a team, I wanted to try and have 2 resistances to fighting in the back. Initially, I was debating maybe like a Shadow Golbat plus Charjabug, but I actually had a chat suggestion recommending Dusclops instead of the Golbat, and Dusclops ended up putting in some pretty nice work. I think my biggest frustration with the meta is I feel like there's not as much flexible play as I might like. There are a lot of very strong Pokemon, but the vast majority of them have very catastrophically bad matchups. Like Dusclops is pretty neutral, but can't do anything into like a Chansey or a Morgrem. You have Lairon, which has a lot of very interesting play across the board, but obviously gets obliterated by Primate. Even Charjabug can get completely walled off by Hakamo'o. So I don't think there's as much flexible play as some other metas, and that's part of why I rank the meta a little bit lower. But overall, I think it's a fine meta and is playable, but unfortunately a very expensive meta, as a lot of these mid-tier evolutions cost hundreds of thousands of Stardust. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.